In our last segment, we took a look at Gary and Jenny. We got to know them as a couple, and we got to see their kind of overall picture with the 60/40 portfolio. But now what I want to show is introducing just a little bit of alternatives into this mix. So what I went ahead and did was I modeled some outcomes, one with 30% alternatives, looking at a mix of land and a little commodities here. And so right off the bat with 30% alternatives, we see we have a slightly more robust, just a couple $100 a month retirement. And I think that's just from having an uncorrelated asset class being thrown in. And we see the same increase, decrease dynamic, a little richer again with the alts in place. And then I went a little crazy and I said, well, let's go 50% alts, right? And a land with a bit of commodity position, still some stocks and bonds, and we're back to where we started. But we're gonna have some different allocations. So wait for this one, gets a lot of fun. Well, what we can do then is go back to our household model really quick, and I'm gonna go to a more sophisticated test plan model. So when we test the plan, it gives us the idea of, all right, if we pull that 12/3 out, what kind of scenarios are we gonna have? And for our household plan, we can see that 22% of the time, this worked out above the plan, and about 1 to 3% of the time, the average worked out a little below, and worst case was about 3% below. So you can actually take a look at some income adjustments using the 60/40 portfolio. Every 2 years we got a little bump because markets did well, and only every 47 years we had to take a haircut. So a pretty resilient portfolio. Let's see how our alts do in the same situation. So let's go look at that 30% alt bracket and take a look at those income adjustments. Well, the first thing you might notice right off the bat is having that kind of uncorrelated land and commodity portion, it did work out a little more robustly. In this case, 99% of scenarios worked above what was planned. We had some pretty good best case and average. Let's look at income adjustments. Same idea, we had income adjustments every 2 years, but we did see more increases over time, 90% of increases 5 to 6. And then we did have kind of bigger increase. We took a little more risk as we went there. And then let's take a look at 50% alts where we get a little crazy with it. With 50% alts, we're back to where we started, but I would like to point out that we did have some crazy best case scenarios here. So with those 50% alts, we did see there was a best case that kind of went rockers. We did see slightly bigger increases, right? But then we did have a higher chance of a decrease too. So if you're a little more risky, I think the alt position worked out a little better in this scenario, something to consider and think about. So that's the first thing I wanted to show. Now I want to get into some retirement stress tests. This may be the single most fun part of Income Lab. I just love it to death. So let's take a look at the Great Depression and let's see how our 60/40 portfolio would hold up. So you have this cool metric where we have the planned income is going to be in this light blue area. And we have, if we use the 60/40 portfolio and rebalance, where would we be? And you can see that actually in the Great Depression, when the Great Depression first happens, yes, we had to cut our income, but you can see it bounce back. And if you go the entire period of Great Depression, going all the way to the 60s, you can see that our family worked out okay. Yes, there was a haircut initially when the Depression happened. We had to cut our income by about $1,000 a month, but it was resilient and came back. We can do the same thing with our alts portfolio. So let's take a look at what 30% alts did. If we had another Great Depression, what would happen? Well, again, yeah, you're going to take a hit, and I think you take a hit because land values did dive during the Great Depression. Then you come back up, and you're pretty good after. But yes, so we did have to take some income hits with our alt portfolio. You can see pretty steep hits as land prices fell during those Depression era. The 50% then is probably going to take it really on the chin, thinking about how Great Depression looked here, and yeah, it does. But again, resiliency, and I would argue more resiliency if you had the time frame to wait. So you can look at those percentages. You can take a look at that. You have stagflation, the dot-com bubble. You have the 2007 to 2009 financial crisis. And the idea here tells the story that, yeah, you have a haircut and it gets better, right? And I think that's the point of this entire illustration tool, is that you're going to take a haircut if you just had stocks and bonds. You're going to take a haircut if you had some alts. Maybe not as big a haircut with just stocks and bonds. But overall, it gets better, it gets resilient, things come around. And that's part of this whole retirement perspective as we look at it through different lenses. I'd also like to take you into tax lab for a minute, because I think this is something that gets exciting and kind of really exciting when we get into that alts world. So what we've thought in the past with any retirement perspective or portfolio was this idea that I would spend down all my taxable money, and then I would spend down my qualified money, and I would spend down my Roth money. And that was kind of what we did 10 years ago, right? Spend all of bucket one, spend all of bucket two, spend all of bucket three. What Income Lab does that's pretty cool is it says, that's dumb. What if instead we go ahead and convert into Roth as we go? All right, so if you want to take a look then at this model says we're going to go ahead and convert into a Roth, and we're going to go ahead and do this every year we can, as long as we can hit lower tax brackets. So we're going to fill the 24% tax bracket every year for Gary and Jenny. So what that means is that we're going to convert some of Gary's IRA and Jenny's IRA, and we're going to keep converting. We're going to pay tax as we go. So we're going to be incurring extra taxes early, but then once we're at about 2030, we've moved a lot over to a Roth, and we're pulling money out tax-free. So what does that do? What that does is, as long as Gary and Jenny live to 2046, we're going to save an awful lot of money converting. So in other words, total taxes paid, when we look at this 60-40 model, we're going to pay around $306,000 of tax over our lifetime, whereas if we do the traditional way of thinking, it could be triple that by the time we're done. Well, I guess the question I have would be, do alts change this puzzle at all? So let's take a look. Now we're going to say we've got these land assets and we've got them in the non-qualified portfolio, and so how's that going to change things up? So let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right, so we've got these land assets to go. So it doesn't really change when the break even happens, but you'll notice then over time, we did have a slightly more overall tax if we don't convert. And I think our lesson here then is that when we have alts in a portfolio, albeit 30 or 50%, converting can be a really great strategy and model, and it's going to actually save more so than it was just a stock and bond portfolio, right? So to say that more concisely, as it thinks, as we have more alts in a portfolio, it's more imperative to convert and take Roth money off the table when you're younger, because the alt portfolios can get kind of tax heavy, especially with ordinary income. So we can think of it as, let's convert while we can to Roth, and then we have a smoother ride in retirement. So the takeaways here are the retirement stress test shows that it's going to come back and can be resilient. It's a pretty cool tool. And we can see in the world of taxes that we really work out maybe converting when we're younger to Roth is going to be better in that alt situation.